Thank you for participating in today's meeting. Please do not connect to Zoom or teleconference while in the room, and please silence all devices. Click on the globe at the bottom of your screen to select either English or Spanish. Public comment will be taken after each item. If you are in the auditorium and wish to comment, please use the iPads located in the lobby. For meetings in other locations, please complete a blue speaker card and provide it to a South Coast AQMD employee. Speakers may be limited to a total of 3 minutes or less for all agenda items, and times may be shortened to ensure all speakers can be heard. A countdown timer will be displayed on the screen for each public comment. Word time will be allotted for Spanish translation that is not simultaneous. For questions or issues on public comment, please call the public advisor at 909-396-3247. That's 909-396-3247. Please adhere to the speaker time limit and treat others with courtesy, civility, and respect. Failure to do so can result in your mic being muted or you being removed from the meeting. Be aware that this meeting is being recorded. By participating, you are authorizing recording of audio and visual content presented during the live event and consent to subsequent use of the recording in the public domain by South Coast AQMD.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Good to see everybody. All right, let's get started on review. Agenda item 1, which is a review of our upcoming board meeting agenda. I did have a request from Derek to go earlier, but I don't see him on yet. So let's start as usual to our public hearings, which starts on page 8. First item we have is on 317.1. Mr. Krause, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that. Okay, so 317.1 is codifying requirements in the Clean Air Act that requires areas of non-attainment to collect fees that exceed 80% above a baseline emissions. Baseline emissions are determined based on the attainment year of that particular standard. So in the case of ozone, we're talking 2 standards here: our 1997 standard and the ozone 2008 standard. And so what the rule does, again, is codifies what is required out of the Act, and it requires facilities that are considered major stationary sources, which means that the potential to emit greater than 10 tons per year, to be applicable to that rule. There are certain, I know some of the questions involved in the development of this has been about the usage of the equivalency approach, which is the approach we did use for our one hour ozone standard. And the only thing with utilizing that, however, is there are 2 criteria that is sets forward in order to utilize that fee equivalency approach. One of those is the standard has to be revoked. Of the 2 8-hour ozone standards we're discussing, only 1 is revoked. The other criteria is it has to be, they consider, in surplus, so beyond what was committed in the AQMD. Unfortunately, the 2016 plan, we did have a number of incentivized programs that we weren't able to actually get, as far as fees are concerned, weren't able to actually fill all the completeness of that. So therefore, we don't have a surplus to utilize, so we don't meet those criteria to do a fee equivalency approach on those. So this rule is based on fee collection. But any further details if you'd like or? Yes.
I'll ask you a question. So one of the things in the rule I thought was a little extreme, because that's the penalty that if you don't pay your fee immediately or within the deadline, the executive officer can take away your permits, right? Yeah.
I mean,
That seems a little extreme for a fee that has nothing to do with their activity there, and it just seems counterproductive saying that you no longer can act because you haven't paid your fee. I think there should be a penalty, but that just seems a little extreme. That's one. The other thing is, when are we going to start dealing with what we're going to do with that money? We've got 2 years basically before, and I would think there might be, the board should be involved with that in some way, yeah. So so staff will come up with some concepts and then present it to the board.
That's correct. So within the next year or so, so two things we're going to touch on. So first off, again, to be clear about the first standard. So the attainment year is in this year, it's 2024. And so the first round that we'll do is to look to see who in 2024 is considered a major stationary source that's applicable to the goal. Also look at those emissions those folks are emitting, and that goes into what's considered the base year emissions. After that, when you look at the future year, you then judge that future the next year, so in this case, 2025 to the 2024 emissions number, and the amounts that exceeds 80% is what then gets invoiced to those facilities. And then it's the following year or so, we start doing those collections of those in the year 2026, if not 2027. So that hasn't really been fully fleshed out on when that could occur on that, but it'll be set up. Okay, with regards to the public process then on those funds when this actually commit in 2027 timeframe, we are looking in the next year or so to have a public process to get all voices and inputs and thoughts and ideas together. We can say that EPA has been pretty clear about first off, they don't have a restriction necessarily on the spending of the fees, except for the fact that you can't just turn around and give it back to facilities. They have to be spent presumably then on other things that we feel are important, like emission reduction projects or technology demonstration projects, what have you.
Well, wouldn't that be dealing with mobile sector when you talk about demonstration projects?
It could be stationary.
What would we take stationary money and go into mobile? That just seems.
Well, I think we're going to be having more discussion on what we do with that. Right, that has to go through a public process and would need board approval.
Yeah, with regards to the collection, the act is pretty clear.
And anytime you deal with public process, you have organizations with their handouts and give us some of that money and we can do things with that. God knows what they'll be doing.
I wanted to touch on the other part. Jason Aspel, Deputy of Engineering Committee, about the revoking of the permits. What's in the rule or the proposed language is simply stating the district has the authority to revoke the permit if fees are unpaid. Through that mechanism, it's in the health and safety code. There has to be a hearing for that. What we anticipate, it will follow our general fee process where the facility doesn't pay within 1 year after we get their invoices, then their permits go expired, non-reinstated. We expect to follow that same process, but in the rule right now, it's just a statement of the authority.
Do we have like a general idea of the population and of the businesses that will be affected and how big they are? Are they even going to be capable of paying these fees? Do we have that analysis done?
Right, yes, so as you know, in Title V, most of the Title V facilities are greater than 10. There are some nuances there, but generally it would be that pool of facilities, and that's about 320 of those, and yes, we do.
Well, I got on this, it was 350 facilities.
There are a few facilities that are outside of the Title V that do emit greater than 10.
So what you're gonna have, as an example, 'cause I ran some numbers, is that you probably will have at least one refinery who won't be paying any money.
Anything, yeah.
And then you have that good little company or facility that has done everything and they have 10 tons per year and they probably do it every year, basically at that level. It comes in, they say, good job, but you owe us $20,000.
Good job, but you suck.
And that's why you need to have a pretty good program of going out and meeting with your folks, your clients, and explaining to them some of the parts way before they get hit with this. That's my opinion. That's all.
Duly noted. All right, I see that we have some hands up patiently waiting, so start off with Michael Miller.
Yeah, thank you. I kind of had two questions really quickly. One was, of the Title V facilities, do we know how many of them are like public or government services, like landfills, water treatment facilities? And then
Yes.
second question was, have we considered any like fee waiver for those? Because realistically, government entities have to recoup 100% of the cost of doing business. So we're just passing the cost of these fees on to the general public, either through their wastewater treatment or trash service fees. So those were kind of my two questions.
Great, thank you, Michael, for those questions. So first off, I'll answer the second one first. No, there's no, the Clean Air Act does not allow for any exemptions from this. It's pretty straightforward on, who's applicable and how that fee thing is imposed. As far as the first part, we do know those facilities. We can provide a list if you're interested in what those Title V facilities are. So we do know those there are differentiations on that. Again, I think the important thing for us is to consider in the spending of those public funds, where we can do that more efficiently, effectively. And here again, their input on how we can potentially utilize those in a beneficial way.
Yeah, if I can get a list, that would be great.
Okay, no problem.
All right, and Deborah, you've been waiting patiently. Go ahead.
Well, I'm following up with that. I know that there was some language from the wastewater treatment facilities that had come forward, and some discussions on how we can alleviate the issues for them. Has there been any continued discussion at the staff level at the resolution or anything like that that we could look at for essential public services?
Thanks for the question, Deborah. So just to clarify, so the request actually coming from the wastewater wasn't not how to spend or that. It was more a question of if there was in the future a change in the act, then the fees would be suspended. We did go back and took a look at that wording and just had discussions with legal and EPA and folks like that with regards to some of how that would be worded and what that would kind of look like. The conclusion was that, if the act does get changed or revoked or what have you, in the future, that we would act accordingly in making those changes, and we don't need rule language to do that. I think some of the biggest concerns that seemed to bubble up from that was really, there's just an uncertainty, because we don't know if there is a change, what that change would look like, right? So it'd be, a revocation of the complete section of the act, would it be just a modification of that, applicability change, and we just don't know. And so if you don't know, then you don't know what kind of requests you're putting in the rule to make what that change would look like.
Okay, Mark Taylor, go ahead.
Yeah, just really quickly, I know that the Title V companies are the ones that are in the pool. My question is, as far as the baseline, initially the staff report indicated that there's a rough estimate of what we think the collection of fees will be, but do we have any idea or are we any closer to knowing how those will be divvied up through the permit holders, or does that still have to be calculated based on the baseline that is still to be determined? So I'm just curious if we have a better idea as we get closer, as we're near now, ready to have a public hearing. Do those that are going to be impacted know what their impact will be, or is it still a guesswork at this time because the baseline hasn't been set yet because they have some math to do?
It's the latter, right? So we have to get those numbers after this year to establish the base year. But I think we have a general idea. They know their operations and what they're emitting and things like that to kind of know or have could foresee if they're going to be applicable to the rule. But we don't have that exact.
I have one more question. Thank you. So, I'm sorry. You done? No, okay. So in this year is one of our compliance years. So we're going to be beginning with the emissions this year. What happens in 2031? I think that's the next date. There won't be, so it will just come up with a new, we go through this process again there, or there's not a double thing, is there? Right? In other words, the 30, the one that we're doing now won't continue.
It depends on whether that, so it stops when the.
It stops.
When the attainment is met,
Okay,
so.
Yeah, the fees stop when you finally reach attainment, but if you don't reach attainment, those fees stay in place perpetually. Okay, Mark, you have your hand raised again? Oh, legacy hand. Okay, good. I see we have a member of the public who wants to comment. Just remind that we're going to go through the whole board agenda and then we'll take public comment after we finish that, as that's one agenda item for us. So with that, maybe moving on to our next public hearing item, item 25, we have Rule 463, Kraus or Morris, which one?
Go, Mike. Good morning. So Rule 463 is our rule that regulates VOC emissions from above ground storage tanks. We are amending the rule per request from our AB 617 communities to address fugitive VOC emissions from those sources. Included as key elements of aspects of the rule, we are planning to have optical gas imaging to better find leaks more quickly and in more places. We're also requiring domes on the storage tanks, secondary seals on all storage tanks, and increase the vapor recovery emission control efficiency for control devices that control those types of tanks. Additionally, we are including a control measure, a contingency measure in this rule to address if there were a failure to meet a NAAQS, a National Ambient Air Quality Standard milestone or provision that would go into effect. What that essentially would do would increase the frequency of those optical gas imaging inspections. And at this point, we haven't had much in terms of issues or concerns raised to us at this point.
Okay, questions for Mike on that? All right, seeing none, let's move on to item 26. So we have 1146.2, and I'm going to pass this on to Heather.
Good morning. So 1146.2 applies to large water heaters and small boilers and process heaters. It really does have broad applicability. It applies to a lot of commercial units, some light industrial, multifamily, as well as residential units. This rule, the emissions from this rule represent 10% of the NOx emissions from our stationary and area sources that we regulate. So it really is a big rule. We are proposing to transition to zero emissions across all the categories. With two triggers, so we're establishing future effective dates. And once they pass those dates, once the unit reaches its unit age, that's when it would have to transition to zero. And our approach is that we're taking the smaller units first, because those are more ready, they're more commercially available, while providing more time for those larger units to transition. We are having several compliance options in the rule to address some of the stakeholders' concerns, including additional time up to 5 years if you have a utility upgrade that is needed. If you have many units that have to transition, we have a compliance plan, so you can spread those out over 3 years. Even doing electrical upgrades before that would happen. 18 months of KUP construction, have some provisions for small businesses. They can transition at the end of their useful life. And we also have some low use provisions. So if the unit isn't used very much, that would be allowed to remain. We are allowing for the high temperature units where the technology does need more time. We're allowing those 9 years before those limits have to come into effect. I can say that we have seen a lot of innovation in this space. A lot of times our regulations are kind of in a bubble. We're just looking at our local air quality. But in this instance, we see other air districts like Bay Area, CARB also proposing zero emission limits. The city of LA has their zero emission limits. Other cities throughout the country, other countries, in fact, are all pushing for this zero emission decarbonization. So we're seeing just a lot of innovation, a lot of new technology that is emerging from this. In addition, and all the major manufacturers really do have these zero emission units that are available now, and they're working on future innovations. We see other companies jumping into this market because of the opportunities. There's also a lot of incentive funding to transition right now. The utilities are incentivizing this. We're working on our own incentive program, which we'll talk about at SSC next month. And in addition, we do have a check-in just as a backstop, just in case. So we will do a technology check-in and report back to stationary source by June 2027. So if things don't go as we see them going now, we do have that opportunity to make any adjustments if we need to. And then just lastly, the rule is anticipated to get a 5.6 ton per day reductions of NOx.
Questions for Heather?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. It is a big rule, 5.6 tons. This is huge. It's good. We are moving forward with it. When I compare your April and March state resource committee presentations, in April, you were anticipating a compliance period of 2029 to 2033. And then in April, when you came back, that deadline has been pushed to 2054 to 2058. That's like 20-year pushback. So with the 2037 AQMD date, how much of that 5.6 tons a day do you anticipate it will be realized by that time? Have you estimated that?
I don't think we know, I don't have that number off the top of my head, but the reason that
Not precise, but at least, is there a range like, because if you're in April, when you were saying, in March, when you were saying 2034, 2033, that means you get all the 5.6 tons before 2037. Now you're pushing it 20 years further.
So that's not really pushing it. As I mentioned, there's two triggers for the rule. So that first is that effective date, when those zero emission go into effect. But the reason we have that long transition is because we're allowing them to phase in at the end of the useful life. So when that unit needs to be replaced, that's when you have to transition to
No, I
zero. So
understand, yeah. But fact is that it's gonna take longer time.
Mhm.
And my question is it gonna be like 50%, 80%, 20% of that before 2037? Any idea on that? Or like, if you
Yeah,
don't, that's fine, but.
It's a challenge to answer. When you apply things like removing that second trigger that had removed, like the unit age, allowing folks to do a natural replacement. That's kind of predictable, right?
Bringing
Like
to my second point is that, if you remember, Sarah, I proposed a incentive fund a few months ago, and it was nice to see at the retreat that we're coming up with both for small businesses and residential units. You're coming up with a $20 million initial estimate to use for this. I think this 5.6 tons a day is at par with a lot of the states' mobile source rules. With, heavy duty vehicles, medium duty vehicles, whatever. And the way the state has been successful is that they have had incentive funds that when you have those deadlines, if people take the initiative to get into compliance earlier than those required dates, then you get incentive funds. So I had a note to Wayne earlier, but that was what I mentioned. In general, I think it would be nice if you can look at some way of creating a continuous incentive funding, not just give to everyone, but then with the purpose of not going to 2058, but maybe telling people if you are gonna do it earlier, you get incentive funding. So people will take initiatives to take advantage of the incentive funding. If they wait all that long, then they shouldn't get that money.
You want to reward the early adopters.
Exactly. That has been the policy of the state with mobile sources, and it has been extremely successful. It has been so successful that I remember when I was on the incentive funds, in many sectors, we wouldn't have any more applicants eligible for those categories because they already had taken advantage of that. And then the rule kicked in. This is, I think, big enough to think in those ways, and what it will require a continuous source of funding, how to come up with those fees. That's a different thing, but when you have for the first year 20 million, I think you have enough time to think about ways of creating incentive funding from whatever source. Because the third point, and this is my last point, I'm not gonna talk too much. The third point is that although you have anticipated 50 to $97 million cost a year. I think the cost is going to be much more because there are indirect costs with panel upgrades, upgrading the current amperage of the units and all that. That's gonna, whoever does that, it's gonna, especially rental units, it's gonna translate to rent increase. And some people cannot afford that. Many people cannot afford in EJ units, EJ areas. So this incentive funding will have actually double benefit. It may prevent rent increase, it may create early compliance.
Hey, Fred, this is Wayne. I don't know if you can hear me, but
Yes.
so I very much appreciate your thoughtfulness in terms of looking at revenue sources for the district and how we can implement many of the needed programs. The concept of a parcel tax was considered, a few years back when we were looking at also a sales tax increase. And the parcel tax, as I think I explained before, was very challenging and not very attractive to the board. But there are a number of other potential ballot measures that we're aware of that are going to be looking at funding opportunities. And I think we may even hear something as soon as tomorrow, where the chair, I think, will be speaking at a session sponsored by Move LA. So I just want to convey to you that there's a lot of thought and consideration going into how we can look at increasing and maintaining revenues through, I would call, unconventional means. And ballot measures are one of them. Parcel tax measures are one of them. As you well know, we're moving forward in all ways. So I just want you to be confident that we're looking at all of those. Thanks. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay, other questions? Bill, go ahead.
Thank you. In terms of the residential facilities that will be affected, how many of those are there? And also, has there been any outreach or discussion with landlords or tenants groups that live or operate those facilities?
Yes, we have done outreaches and gave presentation to some building owner associations. There are considerable number of pool heaters that fall under this rule, which would be installed at residential locations, like 700,000 pool and spa heaters in our jurisdiction. So those would translate. Most of those would just transition to the supply chains. When you go to buy a new pool heater, there's going to be a heat pump there available for you.
Thank you.
Okay, Deborah, go ahead.
And on that same note, what about outreach with regard to hotels and motels that would fall under this rule?
They've also been in that, they've been in the same organization, and we've done several site visits to motels and hotels as well.
And of course, you know that, and it's no surprise where Mayor McAllen has some significant concerns with the impact to dry cleaners. So we would probably like to hear some more about that as well.
Right, those are the high temperature units that we're putting out 9 years from now, and we will be doing further research and looking at that technology to see how it develops. That will be included in our tech check-in.
Great. Other questions on this particular item? Okay. Deborah, do you still have your hand up, or is that a legacy? All right, great. So I had a request from Derek, if we can maybe go out of order and cover his item as he's in Sacramento. And so if we can flip to page 5, I think it's item 6. Derek, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Apologize for the noise in the background, but I'm in the Capitol. So this item is for our federal legislative lobbyists in Sacramento or in Washington, D.C. Their contracts are up in January of 2025. This item is to issue an RFP for representation in Washington, D.C. and up to a maximum of $665,000 if we select lobbyists. I'm available to answer any questions.
Go ahead, Ron.
Back in November, here's the question I had. The current two contractors could we, for instance, as an option, gone out to them and said, listen, you've done a wonderful job and we'd like to just re-up you for another year or two? Are we required to go out for an RFP? And the reason I ask that,
We are required to go out for an RFP. They have already maximized the amount of extensions they can have per the contract. So an RFP is required.
okay, because in November, we were praising them and basically saying we should just keep going with them because they've been so successful and then comparing to the. Why the $200,000 increase?
There's not a $200,000 increase. There's actually 3 federal consultants, not 2.
Oh, okay.
All right, any other questions on this item? All right, thank you, Derek. Seeing none, let's go back to our normal. Oh, go ahead.
Just real quick, Sarah, I have to leave, so I'm going to jump off. We got meetings.
Okay, go ahead, Derek.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, let's go back to our review of our agenda. Let's turn the page to page 9, and we have our PM plan, and I will turn it over to Sandeep.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everybody. So this item is demonstrating attainment of 2012 annual 10.5 minutes for South Coast Air Basin. So this one is 2012 PMX, which is set at 12 micron per meter cube level. It's not the same one the EPA proposed earlier this year. So South Coast Air Basin is a serious non-payment area for this standard. We developed a plan and submitted to EPA in 2017. However, EPA has not acted on the submitted plan, and then in the meantime, they got challenged for not acting on it. And then at the same time, since the submittal of the plan, there are new sets of measurement data became available for the consideration of the SIP. These data are taken at the near roadway monitors. And then this data shows the highest level of PM2.5 in the basin. So EPA indicated they cannot approve a plan that does not include the highest level of PM data in the attainment. So to avoid the potential disapproval, we withdrew the plan last year and then developed a new plan. So this plan is proposing the attainment of this annual PM2.5 index by 2030 for the South Coast Air Basin. And this attainment will rely on NOx strategy outlined in the 2022 AQMD. We also propose limited controls on direct PM emissions and then its precursor as required by Clean Air Act and EPA's rule. So this plan developed through extensive public process and then reviewed by public hearings, etc. But so far we have not heard any significant concerns on the plan. This concludes the briefing.
Questions for Sang-Mi? All right. Seeing none, let's flip to the front of the agenda. Let's go to our set hearing items. So on page 3, and our first one is on 1148.1, and that's Mr. Morris.
So Rule 1148.1 regulates the VOC emissions from wellheads and well cellars at oil and gas facilities. Similar to the previously discussed report, we are looking at this rule per the request of AB 617 communities to address VOC fugitive emissions. Our key proposals for this rule are to include OGI or optical gas imaging inspections, the use of Tier 4 final engines for workover rigs, to establish NOx limits on any other types of combustion equipment utilized at these sites, and to ban the use of odorants used to mask odors when they're doing these types of operations. We do have 2 concerns that staff believes we've addressed, but just wanted to highlight them for you. So the first is regarding neutralizing agents. So we are banning odorants. Those are usually sprayed into the air to provide some kind of smell that blocks the odors. But neutralizing agents are more like soaps or liquids that are applied to encapsulate the odorous materials, and thus not being able to generate an odor. Our community was concerned about the fact that these products might be misused or have harmful substances in themselves. And so to address that, we are not allowing the atomization of these neutralizers, and they may not contain toxics per our Rule 1401. The second issue that came up was a request to provide notification if there were leaks at these types of facilities. And so we are including in the rule a provision that they will have to notify if there's a leak greater than 25,000 ppm. Besides that, I think we covered most of the issues in this particular rule, and I'm available for questions and comments.
Questions for Mike? All right, Deborah, go ahead.
Hi, Mike, real quick, just on the notification, because I know that we had a long discussions about those in previous rules. Are they allowed to do electronic notification, or is it, is it strictly mail and notices? How are they being required?
So this will be an electronic notification only. They will go out to people who have registered through our Rule 1148.2 notification portal.
Thank you.
Hey, any other questions? All right, let's turn the page. We'll go to page 4. We are also setting hearing on our rail ISR rule. So I'll just cover this really briefly. So this is a rule, again, aimed at getting NOx reductions from rail operations in our region. The concept of this rule is to really piggyback off CARB's locomotive rule that they have in place, and just to ensure that the emission reductions that CARB's rule would achieve statewide, that we get a proportional share here in the district. Historically, that hasn't necessarily worked out for us when CARB has taken those actions. So it's really to guarantee we get those emission reductions in our region. That's the quick snapshot. Any questions on that item?
One other question. The rule really only impacts the equipment on, at the various, I guess there's 20 different areas, towns that have this type of activity. And it's not very much. It's one ton per day or something like that. And I noticed that the trains, which are under CARB, actually went from, I think, 15.2 tons to 15.3. If I remember the figures in regard to what the staff report I guess it was the staff report. Why isn't if my comments are correct, why are the emissions not going down for the train? Am I off base here?
Well, why the emissions with the implementation of CARB's rule, or for right? Yeah, so I think CARB's rule is phasing in over time. But yeah, I can go back and look at those specifics. But yeah. Okay.
So this rule is not going to be in any shape or form more stringent than ARB's requirement for our basin?
Yeah, the concept really was to try to, piggyback off what CARB is doing, and just to make sure that we get those, reap those emissions here in the district. As you guys know, there's difficulties with indirect source rule in terms of what we can actually access and some of the preemption issues. And so this felt like a good way to kind of get those emission reductions and guarantee them in our region.
I understand that. That's fine. The reason I'm saying that wouldn't that be, I'm totally supportive of this ISR rule, right? I think it is way overdue that it should be done. But the way we are doing that, we say it's proportional to ARB's estimation of reduction for our basin. Can't ARB do that themselves? There are districts, Bay Area, San Joaquin here, they know the facilities, whatever, or at least in cooperation with the district to streamline the process. They're writing the rule, it's going to be implemented. So we're just going through all this to make sure proportionally we get that reduction. Wouldn't that be more streamlined if that is done jointly with ARB?
We do coordinate with ARB, but right now the rule that they have written is done on a statewide basis. And I think, Fred, you're aware that previous agreements, at least that are done on a statewide basis, didn't result in the type of emission reductions that we would need in our region. So, but we do consult with CARB, and they're aware of our rule, and we coordinate with them. Mark Taylor.
Other than the two public hearings that are not public hearings, public workshops that are happening next week on the 4th and the 5th. Is there any other report out timing that's going to happen? Are there going to be another committee to, go into stationary or mobile source or some other committee? Or is it just going to go directly to the board in August?
Yeah, so I believe we're going straight to the board in August. I think that is, and unfortunately my computer died. So if anybody's jabbering me with any additional information, I can't see. So
Sarah, I think there's a mobile source update.
there might be, there may be, but it would be in August, right? So I'm sorry. Oh, no, mobile source in June. That's right. That's right.
Okay, so it'll happen next week and then, all right. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Any other questions on this item? All right, let's move on to the next item. So items 3 and 4, those are Jason Lowe. Jason, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Jason Lowe, Deputy for Monetary Analysis. Good morning, everyone. For this item, number 3, South Coast AQMD is expected to receive funds in about $270,000 from USCPA for the EPA Enhanced Monitoring Program. So this action is to recognize revenue, appropriate funds, and issue a purchase order for laboratory equipment. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay.
Now, item number 4, which is regarding the Rule 1180 implementation, which establishes funding for South Coast AQMD community air monitoring the refinery. These actions are to appropriate almost $200,000 to the monitoring analysis budget, issue solicitation and purchase orders for up to operation. With that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay. All right. Not seeing any questions for that. Let's move on to page 5, item 5, and Ron, take us away.
Good morning. This action obtained approval for full service purchase lawn-based software and support for 1 year, the amount not to exceed $200,000. Funds for this purchase are included in our budget, and I have any questions.
Okay. All right, we already covered item 6. So let's skip down to item number 7. And I have John listed for this item. I don't know if John, if you is online or
I'm right behind
you're hiding behind me.
Protecting your back. Sorry. Good morning. This item is to transfer funds from the undesignated unassigned fund balance to cover costs for HR related expenditures. The item also seeks approval to amend contracts with outside legal counsel to add funds as necessary. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Seeing no questions on that. The next item is item number 8. This is for our appointments to our hearing board. I don't know do we have someone online who's going to cover that?
I'm here,
Faye.
Sarah. Faye, this is Faye.
Great, thanks. Go ahead, Faye.
Hi. This item is for this item, the administrative committee interviewed candidates for the attorney and engineer members on the hearing board for the next 3-year term that begins July 1st. The committee is recommending for the full board's consideration to reappoint the incumbents. And the incumbents are Robert Pearman as the attorney member, Adrian Conacher-Macklin as the alternate attorney, and Mohan Balakopalan as the engineer member, and Dr. Maria Slaughter as the alternate engineer member. Thank you.
Okay. See no questions on that. Let's move on to page number 6. The item we have here is sort of a standard item on a MSRC. I think Cynthia's online if we have any questions, but just, real quick, if anybody has any questions on that. Okay, seeing none, let's move on to items 10 through 16. These are our information only receive and file reports. Any questions?
I don't have a question on 14 because the report was there. Thank you.
Great. All right, and flipping the page to page 7, we have items 17 through 22. These are reports for committees and for CARB. Any questions on these?
One quick question. I know Derek is not on anymore, but are of the bills that we're taking these support and opposed positions, are they still alive? I mean, I know we're kind of we're in a lag time here. Are they still active? Do we know?
My understanding is that they are. I don't know if anybody online has any better information.
That's correct. We have
Okay.
the three bills, the board member compensation for ARB. We have the extension of the Moyer timeframe for completion. And then we also have the bill for the board member compensation, but not for we have two board member compensations, one for ARB and one for our board only, but that would apply statewide. All three are still open and moving along.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, that concludes our review of the upcoming board agenda. So that was item number one. Right now, is there any public comments on item number one, Ron?
Yes, I'll do.
Okay, Bill Lamar, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Bill Lamar. I'm the Executive Director of the California Alliance of Small Business Associations. And I think David Rothbard plans to comment as well about his concern over the way staff proposes to draft Rule 317.1 and the importance of addressing Section 288 and framing the language of the accompanying resolution. We strongly believe that the rule, not the resolution, should include provision language for the cessation of fees if EPA approves an equivalent alternative to Section 185 fee program, and if EPA provides guidance for acceptable fee equivalency for non-revoked and/or revoked standards for which the district can demonstrate fee equivalency. At the last Stationary Source Committee meeting, Mayor McCollum and Vice Chair Cacchiotti both emphasized their support for staff to form a delegation to go to Washington to seek a possible legislative alternative to punishing businesses, including small businesses, that are already operating at backed or barked with an additional $25 million in fees. I suspect that other board members are like-minded, and I also believe that the rule, not the resolution, should provide for this contingency as well. A resolution is nothing more than a plan or an expression of the opinion of, or will of the board regarding that plan. But unlike a rule, it has no force in law. Please urge your board members to support the businesses that regulate by directing staff to include these provisions in the rule and not in the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Bill. Any other public comment on item number one, review of the board agenda? Go ahead.
Join the table.
Be my guest.
Good morning, David Rothbard. I represent Clean Water SoCal. We're the wastewater sector in Southern California. And first, I want to acknowledge staff's work on this. Mike Krause and I talked last night about the proposed rule 317.1. And the reason I'm here is to, like what Bill Lamar said, is encourage the board direct staff to include something in the rule that has flexibility. I asked Kurt Coleman, former counsel for South Coast, to write up a provision that would go in the rule for the premise of we have a common problem. 317.1 implements Section 185 of the Clean Air Act on Title V facilities, but as you're also aware, the SIP disapproval is dealing with bigger monies, withholding federal highway funding, much bigger issues. And I think we agree that's not fair because EPA dropped the ball. EPA hasn't done their fair share. They need to do something. So this big SIP disapproval that needs to be dealt with. Maybe there's a legislative fix that needs to be had. Hence, the language I provided staff and many of you is saying if we do have a fix for the broader problem, we should have the same fix for Section 185. It's the same problem. The reason why a resolution doesn't work is there's a law, SB 288, that prevents backsliding. If we put this in the resolution only, you may not be able to undo this rule, even if the Clean Air Act is changed. If we have this rule entered in the SIP, SB 288 could prevent any relief. And I also want to note that every other air district with this penalty has flexibility built into the rules. EPA has not disapproved it. Even if EPA were to disapprove your rule with the language I'm recommending, you have the opportunity to fix it. So you don't have to get it perfect the first time. So I recommend mimicking other air districts, put in flexibility, put the ball back in EPA's court, because they're not doing their fair share. Why should we try to appease them when not working with us? So I encourage you to direct staff to put something in the rule to prevent unintended consequences. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. All right. Any other public comment on this item, Ron?
No.
Okay, we move on to item number 2. Any other business that folks want to raise?
I have a question that goes on in regard to this 317.1. In 2010, we had the 1 hour standard that was eliminated. Right? I mean,
It was not eliminated.
not eliminated, but
It was revoked,
revoked, okay.
but it still has effect.
Okay, but it revoked because we couldn't meet that standard?
No, EPA, when they went through their next review process, they have a process by which they can revoke earlier standards if they no longer feel that it's needed for health protections. But a revoked standard still has effect, force in law, as best I can tell. So you still have requirements under anti-backsliding provisions and others. You still have to meet those planning
Well,
obligations.
it brings up a thing that I had felt for a long time, that there's no way we're gonna meet those standards within the time frame, because we're a unique area in the world for ozone creation. There's no area that I know of, or there's no area in America like this, and probably worldwide. We have things going on here in regard to the strong western high that sits over us, sunlight, fact that we have transverse mountains, that only one other area have transverse east-west mountains that act as a tunnel toward the desert. And the desert, we have almost every day we have thermal loads. And thermal loads are the thing that is the engine that drives the pollution going to the east. So we're unique. So why don't we go to the EPA and say, we need some special, I mean, I'm sure you have done that, but because of that type of condition with what, 17 million people living here, ports, and so we're not gonna meet the standard. I mean, you guys know that. We're not gonna meet the standard in 0.084. We're not gonna meet it for probably 20 years. I mean, what is staff doing in regard to trying to change EPA's reaction? I mean, there should be something done, because this is gonna be an ongoing thing for many, many years about meeting the standard, can't meet the standard, we're gonna do this, don't meet the standard, what are we gonna do about it?
I don't know whether Wayne wants to opine upon this. I will say that, these are health-based standards, and we take very seriously the health impacts that result from these health-based standards. And we think there is a path to attainment, but it relies on EPA taking action. But Wayne, I don't know if you want to add to that, if you're still online.
I'm still online. It was well said. We are in extensive discussions, negotiations at all levels of EPA. So thank you for your comments. Just be assured we're actually doing everything that you said.
Okay. Other business folks want to raise? Yes, go ahead.
One thing about the editorial in the Los Angeles Times recently during the retreat, or based on the retreat, I guess. Is there any attempt by the district to try to meet with the LA Times editorial board and try to get them in the future to maybe do a more balanced, or at least not a cheap shot type editorial, which I thought that was, frankly.
Wayne, do you want to weigh in on that, or would you like me to go ahead?
Sarah, why don't you go first?
Yeah, we are in touch with the LA Times editorial board, and Nahal, who runs our communication division, has very good relationships with the folks there. So we do have conversations with them. It's up to them what they want to report on, right? So.
Good to hear.
Okay. All right. If there's no other business, I'll move on to public comments or general public comments. Any general public comment, Ron?
Yes, Mark Robbins.
Okay, Mark, go ahead.
Hi, this is Mark Abramowitz with Community Environmental Services. Good to be talking with you folks again. You may remember about 3 years ago, the Rule 1135 with respect to Catalina Island came before Stationary Source Committee. That island runs entirely on diesel. And the Stationary Source Committee direction was for staff to redo their analysis and come back with a rule proposal after looking at zero emission technology. And staff did a wonderful work on it. Unfortunately, Edison has been dragging their feet and is trying to convince district staff to adopt a weaker rule than staff even brought to Stationary Source Committee. And I hope to talk to many of you in the very near future, if not your board members. But I wanted to point out a few things. Number one is that 90% of the power at Catalina is coming from diesel engines. And that site provides 10%, more than 10% of the NOx emissions from all electricity generating facilities in the South Coast, while providing less than 0.06% of the power. And what Edison wants to do, instead of going zero emission, is replace 3 of their engines with new diesel engines, even though district rules currently don't allow them to install any new diesel engines. And they want to continue to operate those far into the future. They want to pollute in greater amounts than what was presented to the Stationary Source Committee. They want to emit as much as 30 tons a year, when district's proposal would have allowed them to emit only 1.6 tons a year of NOx. And I think they could get it down even further. So I'm very concerned that staff is capitulating to Edison's pressure. And I've never, frankly, seen a company in my over 40 years in air quality, a company that has been more arrogant and cavalier than Edison has been on this issue. And that's saying a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark, for your comments. Any other public comment?
No.
That's your company.
Okay, great. Well, with that concludes our meeting, and we're dark in for this meeting in June, and so we'll see you guys at the end of July. Thanks a lot.
I always thought I was kind, sweet, and patient. I think you
Thank
are.
you.
It's very rough on you.
Hi, everyone.
No.